Hello and welcome to a insightful teaching on why some atheists go to heaven and the nature of God. In this teaching, I want to explore something that I find is so freeing for people, as well as giving some insight into some controversial ideas that have literally plagued religion and literally people for many years. And if we can get into the heart of this, I think we will see a lot of people get free from some of these beliefs that really muddy up the nature of God and the nature of reality, and it offers great hope. So I simply titled this, Why Some Atheists Go to Heaven, as we explore the nature of God. I want to share a testimony of a woman who grew up with her parents who were users of drugs and basically passed that lifestyle on to her. And this was her comfort. She was drastically addicted to drugs. She was an atheist, and eventually she has this overdose. And in this overdose, she has a near-death experience. And what happens is she meets Jesus in this experience, and to her, she thought she was just on some wild drug trip. But she was literally meeting Jesus face to face. And we know this because of the profound change that happened in her life after this encounter. And Jesus was non-judgmental, extremely full of love, as people would hope he is, but often don't understand in religious settings because some religious people are looking for a kind of a judgment. That they think that you only have two choices, and if you don't get the choice in your time on earth to follow Jesus or proclaim Christ, then you are probably going to go to hell. And some people will even attach this as an idea that you'll be there forever. This is very sick. It is very twisted. It's understandable because it's been passed on, but it's really something that causes a lot of damage and causes people to literally be blind to the nature of God. And the nature of God doesn't change, whether in this life or the next or whatever phases of existence you want to talk about. The nature of God doesn't change. So I want to draw attention to her story because she eventually comes out of this experience and goes on this journey where she goes to get help and eventually is completely transformed, and in such a profound way that it set her on her path to service, to love and serve the world as Jesus would do. And so I want to draw attention to a few different things. Is number one, some people believe that atheists go to hell. Well, this experience is proof that that is not true. Number two, this woman was already in hell. She was already living a traumatic life. She was a user of drugs. She was beaten down by the circumstances of life in such a way that she overdosed to end her life and has this experience which transforms her life. And so what we see here is that the nature of God doesn't change whether you are in hell now or, to some extent, some people who have been atheists and proclaim Christians have had near-death experiences where they experience hell-like places. But in all those cases, they come out of it. God rescues them because this is the nature of God. God simply looks for our surrender. Now, this brings great hope because now it's not such a traumatic, oh my God, am I doing it right sort of mentality. It's the journey for everyone to wake up to the love of God. And when we really get into the heart of what Scripture is teaching, which is often taken out of context, let me give you an example. But what we're going to get to is the heart of it is this idea that God's love never fails. It just cannot. There's no way that God would create a world where pain and suffering would last forever. Now, you can choose that world, but you always have the invitation to come out of that should you want to. So here is the example I would share. There is a verse in Isaiah where people will say something when they don't understand God, and they'll use this on the wrong side of how it's supposed to be used. It's basically an error. And it goes something like this: God's ways are higher than our ways. And that's why you must come to terms with, for example, someone who believes that God is going to punish someone forever in hell because God's ways are higher than our ways. The problem with that is it's erring on the wrong side of faith. It has faith in a very antichrist, devilistic, satanic idea of power that isn't in the heart or nature of God. And so if we err on the other side, that nothing can separate us from the love of God, not even life, nor death, nor angels, nor demons, nor heaven, nor hell, nor things created, nor uncreated. Now we're getting into the progression of what the people in scriptures themselves came to understand as they journeyed into their experience of God. And this nature of God gets to the point where, it talks about how people who don't do anything, they don't have any good works, which is sad and it is painful, but they will be saved through the fire. Their works will be burned up, but they themselves will be saved. This is the sort of the heart that you should err on when you talk about God's ways are higher than our ways. You should err on the side that love never fails. This is the nature of God. God is a great Father, and that Father will always, always, always have an open door to prodigals to return once they come to their senses. Now, must share the flip side of this, because there was another atheist who had a near-death experience, and you can listen to this one on a recent documentary from Angel Studios called After Death. And he had an experience where basically an evil spirit got him to kill himself. And when he killed himself, he was falling and falling like in this darkness. And he eventually, he is obviously wrestling. He's in this darkness, and he's like, why? I was a good person, all this sort of reasoning that comes up. Why is this happening to me? But once he surrendered, this is the key point that I don't even know if he understands this in the grand scheme of the nature of God. Once he surrendered, this light came and rescued him, and he had some experiences then with God that changed his life. Notice, though, in all of these dark sort of situations, once someone surrenders, they are invited into the light, or rescued by the light, or rescued by God. One of my favorite testimonies in this, because it brings the balance of heaven and hell realities, would be Howard Storm. Really highly recommend his testimony, because he was an atheist, but he, in a dark experience, began to recite prayers that he remembered from Sunday school as a kid, and that's sort of the surrender that led to Jesus coming and taking him into some radical heavenly experiences. So this is the heart that we're getting in, that we need to err on the side that God's ways are higher than our ways, because he is redemptive and his nature is reconciliation, and that is the ministry we have on earth. If we wake up, we are here to serve, to learn to love, and it's a beautiful thing once we see it. If we are blind to that, we feel separated from God. We can believe all sorts of things and have influences in our life that are not good. But in the end, God wins. And so this would be an example of how we should use Scripture to testify to the nature of God, rather than the arrogance of human finality that thinks it knows eternal things, as if you only had maybe 100 years, maybe 60, maybe 20, depending on how long you live, to figure out an eternal God. If you don't do it, well, too bad. So there's a lot of grace, and it brings a lot of freedom to people. So this is why some atheists go to heaven, because this is not about a heaven and hell structure. That's merely a subplot in the grand scheme of the invitation to wake up to the nature and love of God. This is where we come from. This is from where all possibility originated. This is where worlds were created. And the sooner we align to that, today is the day of salvation, meaning today is the day that you can wake up to this. You may not know entirely intellectually what this means, but there's something in your being that you can begin to make steps towards that relationship, that understanding of the nature of God. And this brings great hope, because in all near-death experiences, like the ones that I have referenced, there's only about 23% of them that have negative, maybe hellish experiences. And typically all of them have then a transformative experience in the light, which transforms them. Now, here's a great example. There is a guy who wrote a book called 23 Minutes in Hell. And he made this claim that those who go to hell can't get out of there once you go there. But it seems like he forgot that he got out after 23 minutes. So you can see sometimes people are not integrated enough in their experience. Maybe it scared them so much that fear is still polluting their theology. It's still polluting their understanding of God. And so perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And when you build your theologies on hell-like punishment and, the kind of like this black and whiteness, finality things, it really messes a lot of people up, causes a lot of trauma. And so many people, like for example, so many people will leave churches because they finally realize some of the foundation of the church isn't actually founded on the truth of God's nature. And that can be a difficult thing, because you can get a lot of people in church through fear. A lot of people. And church isn't bad. Like the main understanding of church is to be people who develop relationships in the pursuit of knowing God, and literally knowing God, not intellectually, like through experience. One of my favorite quotes on this speaks to the nature of God. I first heard it from Richard Rohr. He said that God is not unknowable, but endlessly knowable. And that is brilliant. This really gives rise to the reality that we will forever be learning, and this keeps us humble. But it is inside of this nature of redemption. It's in this nature of reconciliation. It's in this nature of a God who would leave the 99 to get just one who has gone astray, and that God doesn't change. Now, this raises a lot of questions, because for some people, there's a lot of verses that pop into the head. But what about? But what about? And this is why the journey is so important, to have an open mind and have a heart that asks God to lead you into the truth. Because there are so many people out there teaching these different dynamics. We live in a world of information, and we're starving for wisdom. But what is our anchor point should be, nothing can separate us from the love of God. If we keep that in front of us, then we can deal with all the ways we feel separate, and we can learn how to surrender, whether we have a near-death experience, whether we literally die, whatever it is, where we are at in this life. We can then have that as our plumb line to say, why do I feel separate? God, can you help me to bring me into this oneness, like Jesus prayed? Father, make them one as we are one. Basically, make them realize that we are one, because if you get into the heart of it and the nature of God, if you look at Genesis 1, you look at John 1, and you look at Colossians 1, for those who love the scriptures, you will discover that that is why there is no place you can go to escape God. And that is why Paul eventually realizes in Acts that in this God we live, we move, and we have our being, because we were actually created from within this God, and we exist in this God. And that raises a lot of questions, but man, once you get the spirit of it, the Spirit sets you free indeed. So, this was a short little teaching on why some atheists go to heaven and the nature of God. I hope it sparks some curiosity to pursue the actual experience of God, who God really is as unconditional love, because it will heal so many areas of trauma that religion has pushed on this heaven and hell ideas when it errs on the wrong side of God's ways not being our ways. Much love, and may you have a great rest of the day or night wherever you are.